It's a Pedic Ches, Valdvarim Beteilim Beheter. Now, let me even talk about kids in a minute, yes? When a person passes away, they go to Gehenna. You go to Gibez and Shalmaila, you get judged, and you go to Gehenna. Gehenna hurts. Why does Gehenna hurt? Gehenna is the best thing that ever happens to a neshama, because you get cleansed more than 11 months. It can't be even by the Shoyim, right? So it has a limit of time. That's why there's a meaning by Yid not to go to a Beis HaChaim, to a deceased person for the first year, because as the expression that they use is, they're busy. But once the first year is passed, you can visit them as often as you want. And you get cleaned and you go to Gan Eden, and the Gemara says, Muta de Ladayne V'leisa Alma de Asli, the Gemara says about Elisha Acher, who was in Gehenna for who knows how many years, a lot more than 11 months, hundreds of Ichveisvos. From the time of Rab Meir till the time of Rabbi Yechanan, yeah, it's a Meshach Zman, he was in Gehenna, right? Rab Meir, Rab Naka, it's a few generations, yes? And yet the Gemara says, Muta de Ladayne V'leisa Alma de Asli, it's worth to be judged to go to Elam Haba. So why is Gehenna such a bad thing? The answer is because the definition of Yisuri Gehenna is that they feel like Gehenna. When a person's in Gehenna, the one thing that exists that makes it very painful is that you don't know why you're going through it. If a neshama in Gehenna would know that they're in Gehenna, and if they yell us, he would be happy God. Gehenna hurts because it seems to the neshama experiencing it very, very, very useless. Gehenna is for Avedis. Gehenna removes pagam. It removes sensitization, compromise that happens as a result of Aveda. In other words, not just it's a punishment for the Aveda itself, it cleanses the neshama from the spiritual wound that the Aveda leaves, the desensitization, which explains why it says in Sfarad that every time a neshama goes from one Gan Eden to the next, he has to go through another Nahadinur, another Amud, another river of fire, another pillar, like it's explained in Chassidus, because he has to be cleansed again. It's never finishing. But then there's something called Chibut HaKever and Kaf HaKela. Chibut HaKever is when the neshama is still in the grave. The Havon of it is that it takes time for the body to decompose. It's mentioned in Ranat, by the way. And we firzach to bury a person as soon as possible. It's a favorable thing for the guf to decompose, to rot. Because as soon as the guf decomposes, the neshama departs, and it can go away, and it can go up. The period of time that the neshama is in the grave, while the guf is still not completely decomposed, is called, the neshama is stuck, connected to the guf, and during that period of time there's an event called Chibut HaKever. Fana Gemara. The Gemara says, Kasha something lemeis kemachat bebasar achai. Rabbi Lipsker knew kasha lemeis kemachat bebasar achai. In other words, they mamish have a hergesh. A dead person feels pushed physical pain. Are they stating the Gemara? Huh? Chibut HaKever till the body rots. Which is why by us, worse than anything else, is preserving a body. I mean, people today have all kinds of mishigasan, and we hold that anything other than, legitimate burial with tachrichim, we don't believe in. Rima lemeis, kosher rima lemeis, kemachet basar achai. The worms, it hurts. But what they call cremation, where they burn the body into ash, it's also terrible, especially if they keep it in a mantle. If they put the ash in the ground, because it's not covered for the mace. But keeping the body alive is trapping the neshama in this world, Pashut.
So, even after the guy dies, so the neshama still there?
It's still the guf until the body rots. Not a long time at all. Mamish. Well, in a couple of days, within weeks, you wouldn't recognize the person at all. Within days, the bodies rot extremely, extremely quickly, which demonstrates the pella that we know by tzaddikim, that the guf doesn't rot. Because by tzaddikim is a different issue. By tzaddikim, there's enough kedusha in the guf by itself. So this is Chibut HaKever. When the neshama is rid of the body, there's another process called Kaf HaKela. Kaf HaKela literally means a slingshot, where you're being thrown around from one place to another, and you have no control. That's what a Kaf HaKela means. You're being bounced around like a billiard ball, and you have no ability to redirect and to focus and so forth. This also happens till you get into the Bez Shalmaila. Once you get into the Bez Shalmaila, you're being judged, and you're being controlled, and you're being directed, and then there's Gehenna, and then there's Gan Eden, and Azay Vaita. Kaf HaKela, Chibut HaKever are not Gehenna. They're not.
So everybody gets there.
Listen, bald head. Chibut HaKever are not Gehenna. They're less than Gehenna. They're much, much less painful than Gehenna. And they're not a tikkun for Avedis. They're a tikkun for Teves. Chibut HaKever is a tikkun for Teves, where a person ate kosher, enjoyed food, whatever it was, enjoyed Gashmias. Except for Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Shaleinene Me'elam Hazeh Ketz Baktana, the Gemara says, who had no pleasure of Elam Hazeh. Every person has to be cleansed from the Geshmak they had in Elam Hazeh. Is it an Aveda to have a Geshmak in Elam Hazeh? No. But it's Sitra Achra. So while in the grave, Chibut HaKever washes away the pagam of Dvarim HaMatanim. Kaf HaKela, which is the slingshot, which means being in a situation where you're being thrown around and you have no control, you have no ability to stop it, is for Dvarim B'Teilim, for Narishkeiten, for idle words, for air, for luft, which some people are rather, shall we say, proficient with. So the whole chap is that these are not Avedas, but they're not mitzvahs. They're in between mitzvahs and Avedas. And we know there's no such thing as in between. If it's not a mitzvah, it's sidra achara. So there's a cleansing, but the cleansing is not in Gehenna. The cleansing is in before the neshama comes lamayla. And it says in Ayim Yom, I keep repeating it, I should look it up inside, that there's a segula to be nitzvah chibat hakever and kafakela. One of them is to say Eisi Sateda, 1/6 of them Eis La'Eis, and the shiva to be nizar from the other is that as much time as you can, you should say Baal Peh, Eisias of Teda, Mishnayos, and Zayed, and so on. What's the idea? What's the idea that this is a protection? What does it mean that by saying Eisias Ateda or by Chazing Mishnayos Baal Peh is a protection for the Kevin Kafakela? The idea is as follows. The punishment of Chibat HaKevin and Kafakela really is you're in a situation where you have no control. Yeah, imagine you're floating through outer space, you have no steering wheel, you can't go here, and all these creatures are just coming over to you and tickling you and running away. So obviously nobody likes to be bothered, but the most frustrating thing about the bother is you have no control. Something is happening to you, you can do nothing about it. Here I'm reading, this is Zayin Teves. Hashir li pote bechibat hakever is that's 1/6 of Eisias Atera Tehillim. And then to be mezachach the nefesh, to be spared kafakela, which is this billiard board situation, we're being thrown around and you have no control, is chazara kol hayom kama shebiyacholte mishnayos Tanya Tilim Baal Peh. So the oisius protects you from chibut hakever, the Baal Peh protects you from kafakela. And by chibut kafakela uses the lashon zachis hanefesh. It's already more ruchniistic than chibut hakever. The painful thing about chibut hakever and kafakela is you have no control. When you say these, when you keep these shmide, you don't have control. In other words, nobody has control. From when the person dies, so nobody has control. Never then. Gehenna veisach nicht. But in Gan Eden you don't need control because you're in a good place. When you're in a good place, you're nothing to be afraid of. But in Chibut HaKevin and Kavak you have no control. What the Eis HaTeiret filled, they push at a shield. These forces that want to mock you, and through mocking you, be mezachach the Dvarim HaMutarim and the Bittul Teire try to come to you, and it protects you like a wall. Von der Aussprache von Alten Rebbe, der Alte Rebbe hat gesagt, it protects. Here we're speaking to protect you from Chibut HaKevin and Kafakil. Sorry?
If you have a text, how to refine a person?
It's a fair question, and I suppose that the zichur happens without the tzar. I suppose. Now let's read today's shir. You have a Tanya. It says the Alter Rebbe v'al b'teilim beheter. So yesterday we learned page Yud Gimel. We learned about Chibut HaKever. There's Tanyas, right? Chibut HaKever is for Teves, and for Dvarim b'teilim beheter for speaking idle words that are permitted. K'gein am ha'aretz, for example, an am ha'aretz she'eina yachad lilmed, you cannot learn, and therefore it's allowed to speak Dvarim b'teilim. You know, it says in Tanya Pedekal from the Gemara that if a person is mavatal teira, it's dvara the shambaz of a game, it calls the keras of a game. How can you say dvarim b'teilim beheter? You have a chiyuv to learn teira 24 hours a day. And the teretz is that teira has shiurim. Not everybody has the same shiur. A person for whom dvarim b'teilim is permitted because his shiur of limit teira is, let's say, perek echad shachas, perek echad arvis. So for such a person, right? Tzarich l'tar nafshe metumah zu. You have to cleanse your soul from this tumah, the klipa zu, from this klipa. I de gilgul b'kafakela, by being rolled around in kafakela. But shkosa b'dei pasel b'shach dafnu entas. Says the Rebbe Avo. However, l'diburim asurim. If a person spoke words which are an aveda, and this is where the word iser comes in. Shalosh was means like ani iser. Kamei litzan is lashon hara, or creativem and so forth. Sheheim mishalosh kibut meis legam, which come from the severe klipas. Ein kafakela levadi male. It's not enough to have this cleansing because it's not gehenim. Letahir, to purify. Ulahaver to masam nefesh, to remove the spiritual uncleanness from the soul. Considering that it's Isser. Isser means it's a prison that locks you down. You have to descend into Gehenna. That Misha Efshel Lasik B'Teira. If a person could learn Teira, so then Dvarim B'Teilim becomes an Aveda. It's not Beheter. Ve'esim Dvarim B'Teilim, he speaks Narishkeit, you speak about the weather, you speak about cars, you speak about whatever. And it's not Lashon Hara. So ein kafakela levadei meil nafshe. Since he has a chiyuv to learn Teira and he didn't, kafakela is not going to be sufficient for his soul. Lemarko lezachecha, to cleanse, to clean it, to wipe it and to purify it. Like ancient chamurim, you have to have more serious punishment. Shemanishma bittul Teira bepratus, which punish bittul Teira particularly. In addition to the general punishment, if you didn't do any mitzvahs asay because you were lazy, so you have a gehenim shel shenik. You know what gehenim shel shenik is? They put you in a room, they fill the room with svarim, and they make you bored. They make you not want to learn. But you have made in the ketzar. What do you They roll you in snow? What's my gehenim shel shenik? It's the gehenim of kalkite. You are aware. You see Yiddishkeit around yourself, and you can't get past your own ice, and it hurts. In other words, it's mamish mida keneged mida. You didn't learn Torah, so they put you in a room full of books, and they take away from your cheshek to learn. But now you have gevaldik etzar. You want to learn because you don't have a nefesh habamis, and that's the gehenim. It's mamish mida keneged mida. So in addition to the general gehenim shel shelag, the gehenim of being frozen cold, which is a way of compensating for not doing mitzvahs asay. Yes, machmas atas because of laziness. So there's also a punishment for bittul Torah. Now comes the final thing in this painting. If you learn chachmas chitzenius. Now, there is chachma which is mamash asur. Like you're not allowed to learn about Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to learn comparative religions, you're not allowed to learn apocryphals. But then there's some chachmas chitzenius. I mean, today unfortunately every chachmas chitzenius has to have its mandatory sheet of apocryphals, otherwise it doesn't pass for intelligent. But I'm saying, chemistry, biology, physics, mathematics. This is real chokhmah, but it's chitzenius. It's peripheral. What makes it chitzenius? There's no room for God in mathematics. There's no room for God in physics. There's no space. Push it. The science, the way the science defines what's real and what's not real, and how you measure. Don't measure. There's no place for the Eibush. That's what makes it chitzenius. In other words, it's sitra achara, but it's not evil. It's the other side because it's not bottled to the Eibush, but it's really by itself neutral. Chochmas chitzenius by itself is not a bad thing. It's klipas nega. Klipas nega is sitra achara. So you're not allowed to learn it unless you have a heter. But it's not an aveda. Purely speaking. The Rebbe has a sikh in Chelik Yud, Chelik Tezvav, he writes, Ich meine is the meaning of getting in college because that's a basis nus, and it's a base Avodah Zarah, and it's a base apocryphals. We're talking about the chokhmah because the college has very little to do with the chokhmah nowadays. It has to do with the partying. The chokhmah by itself is klipas nega. It's considered bittul dvarim betelim like adin bittul Torah. If you have a chiv of a gisa b'yem of a laila, and you learn chachmas chitzenius, you ever ana esse. Why? If you're a person who can't learn Torah because you're amoaret and your chiv is perigechat shachas perigechat arvis, so your aved of bittul Torah is of chachmas chitzenius is only dvarim betelim beheter, which kafa kela is enough. But there's another factor. That you say to Masa Shachachmas Umeis, there's an additional aspect that's negative of the Chachma of Umeis Elam, al Tumas Varam Etelam, of the Tumah of speaking Stam Narishkeiten. In other words, even if a person is permitted to learn Chachmas Chitzenius, because he doesn't have the koyach to learn Teda, there's still a difference between talking about cars and talking physics. Why? Because Dvarim Etelam Mishaene Malbish Metamer Akamidis. When you speak Narishkeiten, words appeal to the heart. Words come from the heart. So the chatter, the hakachainik that you do affects the midas of the person. From the Holy Spirit, the ruach, right? Of the divine soul, from the spirit, from the uncleanness of the klipa called nega, which comes from the idle words, which come from the evil element of ruach, which we discussed in Tanya Seif Perek Aleph, which is from this klipa benafsha bahamas, and the animal soul kedillas we discussed before. In other words, in Perek Aleph, the Alter Rebbe said that Eish Ruach Maimen offer. What comes from Ruach? Heilalus, Litzanus, is Spailas, Dvarim Betelim. Litzanus, the Alter Rebbe says, is an Aveda. Dvarim Betelim is Klipas Nega. So if you speak Dvarim Betelim, you matama your midas. Says the Rebbe, you're not contaminating your intelligence. You're speaking stupidity. Person speaks stupidity, you can't say you matama the moyach is off. Even fools and ordinary people, simple people, could speak this Narishkeit. And by the way, every one of these times that the Loach HaTikkun, the Evdi Gelulim is taken out. Evdi Gelulim means Chochma V'Aved Zara, which is Alav De'erais. Chochmas Ha'umes is Klipas Nega. And the reason that the Gelulim was here is for the printer, for the censorship. Says the Alter Rebbe, so it may be true, if you're Mechoyev Agis B'Yem V'Alayla, then it's Bittul Teira. It's an Aveda. If you're not Mechoyev, then it's even It becomes a garment for it and contaminates the Chabad of the divine soul. But Tumas Klipas Negish b'Chochmas El, the Tumah, which is from Klipas Neged, which is also Sitra Achra from these Chochmas. Shenaflu Shama, because they're Chitanius. What does Chitanius mean? They're intelligent ideas that have no space for the Eibishter. That means they're separated from the Creator. How could something real deny its own creator? It's a chokhmah, an intellectual system, devised and designed by Atzmos Amhus, by the Eibishter himself, that has no space for him. So it's naflu, they fell. B'shviras HaKelim, in the shattering of the Kelim, b'chinas HaCharayim, shechokhmah the Kedusha, from the back of Chokhmah the Kedusha. Chokhmah the Kedusha is full of the Eibishter. Chokhmah Umet has no space for the Eibishter. So for this kafakela, it's kafakela, but the pagam is more, right? The Alter Rebbe is really bavorening why you shouldn't learn it. He's not saying you can have more fakela. He's saying don't learn it. Yeah, it's there's an exception. There's a way that learning Chochmas Umis is not klipa at all. And what is that? If you study Chochmas Chitzenius for Parnasa as a hatchet to make a living, you should make a Parnasa generous to level to serve the Eibishter. And the Rebbe in his letter brings 5 heterim for learning Chochmas Chitzenius. You need it to fulfill a mitzvah, like Kiddush HaChedesh. You need it because it's a hechsher mitzvah, like learning geometry to know how to make a sukkah and to make a native. Okay, but from Clarence to the astronomy, I don't want to make myself into any trouble. But sometimes the Rambam is not sufficient, or the Rambam himself, or you need learning it so that when you're in a Beis HaKisei you should think Cheshbeinis, so that you shouldn't have Haruri Teira, which is Asr. Or you're learning it for a Parnasa. There's one more reason that I'm forgetting. But 5 different Heteirim to learn Chochmas Chitzenius, where it's not mitzad the Chochmas Chitzenius itself, it's mitzad the Heter. But then there's a 6th one. The 6th one is you're learning Chochmas Chitzenius not because you have a heter, but because you are making the Chochmas Chitzenius itself Kedusha. And for this, you have to be a unique kind of person. Listen. You know, how to use them, to serve the Eibishter and for his Teda. Not as a Sad and as a Siyu and as a Hechsher. You make Chochmas Chitzenius into Yiddishkeit. When you learn it, says the Rebbe, V'zeh Time Shal Rambam V'Arambanza. Yidden like the Rambam. Yidden like the Ramban. When they learned Chochmas Chitzenius, it wasn't the pshat that had a heter. It's the pshat is Vizayatan and such people, their helpers, to involve them, that they learned it because they made from it Kedusha itself. In other words, not that it helped them be a Yid. They had a heter learn Chochmas Chitzenius. Their Chochmas Chitzenius itself was Kedusha. So this is a letter from the Rebbe.